Tonight, on Women, War and Peace, in Bosnia, Serb forces took aim at women's dignity.
I could never have anticipated what was going to happen. Never.
They would come in and just say, you, and you.
But a few brave women aimed back and changed the face of justice.
You knew that she didn't want to have sex with you, did you?
And the fact that it was war is not a defense.
I wanted to prove who had done this to me.
I came to testify. Next, on Women, War and Peace. Major funding for Women, War and Peace has been provided by
Men of substance do not abuse women.
We are fed up with the war.
They thought that none of us would survive to tell the truth.
You cannot take our land away from us.
Not the first case where rape has been charged as a war crime, but it is the first case where rape has been charged as a crime against humanity.
Your Honors, this is a case about rape camps in eastern Bosnia. This is a case about the women and girls, some as young as 12 or 15 years old, who endured unimaginable horrors as the worlds collapsed around them.
They would come mostly during the night, and we didn't have any light in the hallway. They would yell and they would scream.
They'd call out the girls by their names, and then they'd take them off with them.
I was fully conscious for the first 6 of them.
And I don't know how many there were after that. There could have been about 20 of them. I don't know. He held a knife in his hands and asked me, "Which breast of yours do you like better?"
He asked me, should he slaughter my daughter?
That he would cut up my face and that they would slit our throats.
They said, "When we don't need you anymore, we're going to kill you." They thought that none of us would survive to tell the truth.
Nije to stid. Ne želim da me neko gleda i moje lice da gleda, da kaže to je ona. Možem sašati moju priču i sve to, ali ipak ne znam ko sam.
In April of 2000, 8 years after her town was attacked by an army of her own countrymen, a woman bearing the scars of war traveled from her home in the Balkans to a courtroom in the Netherlands. She took the stand as witness number 99, a cloak to protect her from the harm that could come from the truths she was about to reveal.
I solemnly declare that I will speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Witness, how old are you?
52.
What ethnicity are you?
Muslim.
Witness, in 1992, when the war was taking place, how old were your sons?
My one son was 23 years old, and the other was 22.
Where did you live?
Foča.
U zanimljivom planinskom predjelu, obraslom šumom, na obalama Drine i ušću Čehotine je gradić Foča.
I was born in Foča. Things were good for us. We had a good life. We had everything before the war. I couldn't imagine my neighbor hurting me or me hurting a neighbor. Everyone was like one family.
ZR was also living in Foča when the war began in 1992. She was a newlywed with dreams of starting a family of her own.
I got married right before the war. I remember it was a Friday the 13th. People say this was an unlucky day, but for me it was very lucky. He was really full of love and care. I saw in him a man I could spend the rest of my life with. Life was ideal, and no one cared about who was Serb, who was Croat, who was Muslim. We were all friends, all of us. We went to parties and celebrated New Year's Eve and birthdays and the births of each other's children. We were in each other's weddings, best man, maids of honor. Today you cannot even imagine living like that, but that's really how it was.
Brotherhood and unity. Brotherhood and unity was the ideology of the Yugoslav society. It meant that we of different ethnicities, different nationalities living in this country were brothers. I was in a classroom with Serbs, Croats, Jews, Gypsies, Muslims. We didn't have a clue who was a Serb, who was a Croat, who was... I mean, this was completely irrelevant to us. We had a saying that a neighbor is much more important than your brother. I'm painting a picture of a perfect existence, I know. But the overall spirit in which we lived was this.
The fabric of brotherhood and unity that kept ethnic strife well under wraps in Yugoslavia began to fray following the death of socialist leader Marshal Tito in 1980. By the early 1990s, nationalist leaders were dredging up centuries-old ethnic divisions. Muslim and Croat leaders were pushing for independent states, while Serb politicians were gaining strength behind claims of an impending Islamic takeover.
Što se I danas kao nekad protiv Srbije udružuju njeni neprijatelji van zemlje sa onima u zemlji.
Three raised fingers of the Serbian ultra-nationalist Chetniks became a foreboding sign to the country's Muslims.
Bosnian Muslims were so dehumanized through the propaganda.
A muslimanski narod možda u nestanak, jer muslimanski narod ne može da se odbrani ako bude rato.
All of a sudden they ceased to be neighbors, workmates. Little girls ceased to be little girls, but they became this filth.
Suddenly, there were divisions between people according to their ethnicity. In Foča, Serbs and Muslims stopped being friends. I noticed that the Serbs started moving their civilian population. They took their children out of the schools and sent them somewhere else. My husband was the manager of his company, and all of a sudden, all the Serbs went away on some kind of vacation. It was actually for military training. It was all to prepare them, to teach them to shoot, to kill Muslims. That's when the Serbs started singing their nationalist songs. I remember spending a night together with my neighbor, unable to sleep, scared, because they were singing Chetnik, really Chetnik songs. War was in the air. The
The Serbs were positioned on the hills and our movements were being watched. We were paralyzed by fear.
One day when we were on our way to work, we noticed the checkpoints. They were guarded by Serbs armed with guns. When my husband and I were returning home, an armed Chetnik cocked his gun at us. He put a gun at our throats. That's a detail you never forget.
I thought that it was going to pass, that it was simply a turbulence, and everything will calm down, people will see sense. I could never have anticipated what was going to happen. Never. In a million years. Never, ever.
That day, the Serb army attacked, and the shots were coming from every direction. A woman from our village was killed. Her child fell out of her arms.
It became clear to everyone that this was war and that they had to save their skins. But where could they go?
In 1994, I was working in Sri Lanka, and I got a phone call out of the blue asking if I wanted to work for the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal. The war had been in the news, but I had no idea that a tribunal had been established. I had no idea about the contours of the war, about what the tribunal was. I had just finished law school, so I said yes. Small adventure. I thought I was moving to Denmark. You know, the Dutch live in Denmark, I thought, but no, it turned out to be Holland.
Tejri Thapa made her way to the low-lying Netherlands from her mountain home in Nepal, where she grew up in a family of political activists. When she arrived in The Hague, the Bosnian War had been raging for 3 years. From the earliest days of the war, there were accounts of atrocities against civilians on all sides of the conflict. TV reports finally made them too real to ignore, and in 1993, the United Nations established the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal. It was the first international war crimes court in Europe since Nuremberg, and the first ever to be convened in the midst of a war.
My husband is from the former Yugoslavia, and we followed the news when the war started.
It was the first air raid on a European region since World War II. And war seemed to have begun again in Yugoslavia.
That this could happen after such a short period of time where everybody else was saying this will never happen again in Europe. It did happen. And that was very upsetting.
Hildegard Urts-Retzlaff was a seasoned litigator who'd spent years prosecuting cases of fraud and other white-collar crimes in her native Germany. She came to the fledgling tribunal while 800 miles away, the Serbs' campaign of ethnic cleansing was advancing with devastating brutality.
The thing that was the most heartbreaking about the war in Yugoslavia is that this was neighbor on neighbor.
Peggy Kuo came later to the tribunal from the U.S. Department of Justice, with experience in prosecuting hate crimes and civil rights cases.
I came to the U.S. when I was 3 from Taiwan, and I went to public school in New York City. There were Hispanic kids, black kids, a couple of Asians, white kids, Jewish kids. There were always fights. There were racial taunts. I got called names. Maybe seeing how badly kids behave when the grown-ups aren't there made me a prosecutor.
Peggy Kuo joined Tejri Thapa and Hildegard Urts-Retzlaff to form the heart of a team assigned to investigate the growing tales of horror that were filtering out of the eastern Bosnian town of Foča.
The impression that I formed was that bad stuff had happened, but the truth was impossible to figure out. And we had to eventually, as in all of these cases, you have to go and you have to look for the individuals who were there, who knew the story.
The day the shooting started, They gathered us in the forest, even the children and women, and then took us to a field. I saw two of my neighbors whom my sons worked with. I expected them to do something, but they didn't. 7 men, including my husband and sons, were separated from the rest. And then they told us we should start walking. When we were about 100 meters away, we heard the shots being fired. We didn't even dare to look at each other. I was lost. My children, my husband, and my neighbors, 32 people were killed on that day.
This was literally neighborhoods imploding, everything collapsing around you. People who yesterday were your brothers, were your closest friends, all of a sudden, one morning turning into uniformed strangers.
Our next-door neighbor came. My father-in-law had practically raised him. He wasn't some stranger. He had 1 million cups of coffee and lunches at my father-in-law's. He came to the door and kicked the door in. He was armed to the teeth. He gathered all of us into the kitchen, and then he took a knife and cut off my clothes. He raped me and beat me in front of my father-in-law and mother-in-law. When he finished molesting me, he loaded a bullet in the chamber of his gun and shot my father-in-law, killing him instantly. Then he killed my mother-in-law. He had a gun in one hand and he was holding me by the hair in the other. He turned around to shoot at my sister-in-law. I gathered my courage. I suppose that's what God wanted. I took advantage of his lack of attention and, thank God, I struggled out of his grasp and escaped. I hid in a pumpkin patch that was 60 feet from the house. He couldn't find me, so he set fire to the house. I was 60 feet away, and I saw everything.
ZR trekked through the forest for days, scared and hungry, the fate of her imprisoned husband unknown. She evaded the Serb army and gangs of paramilitary forces and eventually found her way out of the country to the relative safety of a refugee camp. For Witness 99 and hundreds of other women trapped in Foča, the nightmare would continue. While their sons and husbands were being beaten, starved, and executed in concentration camps, the women of Foča were locked in hotels, schools, private homes, and makeshift prisons around the city.
They said we should get ready. There was a truck waiting in front of the school. They didn't tell us where we are going and we didn't ask. We couldn't say anything.
They took us up to the last classroom on the first floor.
They took us to a sports hall.
They would come and curse us, tell us that we Muslims were getting what we deserved.
There were about 30 or 40 of us.
There were 72 of us there.
Women and children.
After they gathered us, the raping started.
A report for the United Nations today confirms that rape has been used on a deliberate, horrifying scale in the civil war in Bosnia.
The international community estimates that Serbs may have systematically raped as many as 20,000 Muslim women as a weapon of war.
This woman is one of a number we spoke to from different towns in Bosnia who told us that Serbs had set up brothels in their towns. Younger women were kept there and raped repeatedly.
Stories like these have been filtering out for more than 6 months now, as the world stood silently by.
That dismissive attitude that rape is always a byproduct of war and the shrug that goes along with it is the very attitude that we're here to protest and to draw attention to. The systematic, sadistic sexual violence against the Muslim women has been known for months and months and months, and the international community and the powers that be have done nothing to stop it.
Rape has always been an undercurrent of war. People talk about raping and pillaging, and it just becomes a phrase that people don't think about. They just think it's an attack on the civilian population, raping and pillaging.
This is the building in Nuremberg where 20 top Nazis are being tried for many crimes.
The wrongs which we seek to condemn.
I had heard that in Nuremberg, there was a discussion about whether to bring up the subject of rape because a lot of rapes had occurred during and after the war. And somebody made a comment, we don't want a bunch of crying women in the courtroom. If you look at the pictures of Nuremberg, it's mostly men. The defendants, the judges, the prosecutors, the defense lawyers. In that environment, women aren't given a place at the table, even as a witness, in many cases. In the maybe 50 years since Nuremberg, a lot of things have changed. There are more women in the profession, prosecutors, judges, people who are dealing with the witnesses and saying, this is an important issue, we should talk about it. It's worth talking about, and it's worth getting it out there, so at least, even if we're not prosecuting every single rape that occurs, that we're acknowledging that this is what's happening and women's experience during wartime.
In December of 1995, the warring parties in Bosnia came to Paris to sign an American brokered deal that put an end to 3.5 years of fighting. In the aftermath, details of atrocities in places like Prijedor, Visegrad, and Srebrenica came into gruesome focus. And Foča, which had been sealed off from the tribunal investigators behind the wall of war, finally became a reality as they made their way through the ravaged city.
It's like stepping into a painting that you've heard about, but you actually start walking in that painting.
What they found was a fractured, inhospitable place. Half its residents, some 20,000 Muslims, were simply gone. All 14 of their mosques reduced to rubble. They even tried to erase the name by calling the town Srbinja, meaning place of the Serbs. Under the protection of UN forces, the investigators documented the places they had heard about in the testimony of survivors. Bukbiela, Miljeniva Hotel, Jaga's house, Klanfas, Partizan. Now, crime scenes. The physical evidence they collected in Foča convinced the team that they could build a case to prove that an organized campaign of rape had indeed been used as an instrument of terror.
It has a huge impact on the entire family and the entire community. If people hear of rapes in a neighbor village, they flee.
The rapes were used for not only the immediate impact that they had on women, but the long-term destruction of the soul of the communities.
What happened to the women and girls in Foča had been repeated in besieged towns all across the country. One Bosnian investigation alone collected over 10,000 statements from women who reported being raped during the war. Official United Nations estimates put the number of victims at 20,000. Others say it is likely 50,000 or more. In previous war crimes trials, these rapes, when charged at all, were simply listed under an umbrella of offenses like crimes against humanity or inhumane treatment. The Hague Tribunal took the historic step of issuing an indictment devoted exclusively to rape and other sexual crimes.
We took the position that's important to actually move forward on this sector and to develop international law on sexual assault. And we prevailed, and yeah, it was charged as it was.
The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia is now in session.
For the first time in history, an international court is hearing a case about camps set up specifically to rape women.
3 Bosnian Serb defendants are accused of systematically raping Muslim women and reducing women and girls to sexual slavery.
Defendants Zoran Vukovic, Radomir Kovac, and Dragoljub Konarac, petty commanders in Bosnian Serb paramilitary units, are accused of helping imprison Foča's women and children.
Day one was a big deal.
Of committing rape, often.
There was this sense of finally it's happening.
All 3 defendants have pled not guilty.
Being able to see these people led into the courtroom provided me with some sense that everything is normal in the world. That if these people are arrested and they are being led by the guards and put on trial, that we still function as human beings.
Refik Hodzic was responsible for publicizing the tribunal's work throughout the former Yugoslavia. He was a teenager when the war broke out in 1992 and was sent to family in New Zealand for safekeeping. He returned to Bosnia, a journalist, and reported on wartime atrocities before coming to The Hague.
When I got to the tribunal, I was almost a junkie for going to the courtroom. Because at that time, the tribunal was the institution crucial to the hope of recovery of Bosnian society.
Number 16 itself is where Mr. Kunarac and his soldiers stayed.
Not only was it one of the first trials at the Yugoslavia Tribunal, but it was the first of this kind, where it's only sex crimes that are being alleged.
The success of the case hinged on the participation of 16 women who had agreed to come to The Hague to tell their stories. Their testimonies would embody the experience of the hundreds of women held captive in Foča.
I don't know whether you have ever testified in front of the court. I did, not here, but in my own country, and I was so nervous, although I was a prosecutor. It's an experience that's not easy. Nowhere, and for no one. In particular, not speaking about sexual assaults suffered in front of an audience, mostly males.
One by one, as their days in court approached, many of the Foča victims who had agreed to testify informed the prosecutors that they were having second thoughts about coming to The Hague.
It was fear. It's fear. Fear of retaliation, fear of what happens if I go public with the story. And just not wanting to relive it.
I never lived through what they lived through. I never saw any member of my family killed. I've never been raped. I've never seen my house destroyed. I've never seen my country fall apart. And so the best you can do is to say, it must be very difficult for you. So, and I appreciate your helping here, and tell me what I can do to help you.
In the end, all of the witnesses scheduled to appear decided they would take their place on the stand.
I think it was a desire for justice, even if it's a part of their lives they want to forget about. But it is knowing deep down, that's what I have to do. That's what I want to do. It's what I have to do. I'm afraid to do it. I'm scared to death to do it, but that's my end. That's my end.
Witness, do you see your name?
Yes.
Next to your name, do you see a number? The witnesses all opted for the protection where their faces would not be seen and their names would not be used.
Yes.
Throughout these proceedings, you will be referred to by that number. Do you understand? Inside the courtroom, everybody could see everything. We could see the expressions, we could hear the voice intonations, but outside you can't see that at all.
He forced all 3 of us to strip. Always with this knife in his hand. He always had this knife.
So this case is a case that really lacks a face.
And then he said, you're now going to go naked down to the Drina River, and that he would slit our throats there and throw us into the river.
You can't see how young the witnesses are. You don't hear the anger in their voices.
Didn't anyone try to protect you?
Oh, really? They were ridiculing us, the people who were watching. Who do you think would protect us?
I remember a woman who was talking about being led by Kovac through the streets of Foča, naked, and nobody coming to her help. Through this scrambled voice that was coming through, which took every emotion out of what she was saying. That is what made me froze.
And then he brought us to where the Chehotin and Drina rivers meet. And I just looked back at him because
I wasn't able to go forward. But I always thought, you're not going to slit my throat. You're not going to slaughter me alive. And the tide was high, and I thought that I just threw myself into the Drina, that I rather drown than have my throat slit by him. And I kept saying to myself, I won't let him slaughter me, I won't. That was the one thought that I had.
Sometimes people will talk about how the women were humiliated. But I always try to turn that around and say the perpetrators tried to humiliate them, and they tried to take away their human dignity. But the people who came and testified were able to maintain their dignity, and they didn't let the perpetrators take their humanity away from them. So yes, in one sense they were victims, but in another sense, they were the strong ones. They survived.
The Serb forces controlling Foča kept dozens of women imprisoned in Partizan Sports Hall, a recreation center right in the middle of town, just a stone's throw from the police station. Witness 99 spent a month captive in Partizan.
We weren't treated like human beings. We were treated more like cattle, like animals. I watched women being taken away. I didn't know if they would come back.
17 days into the trial, Witness 99 took the stand to tell the world what had happened inside of Partizan.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I wasn't ashamed. I was actually proud and full of strength. I looked him in the eye. How come he's not the one who was ashamed? I wanted to prove what I had survived and what had happened.
Did soldiers come to Partizan and take out women and girls?
Yes.
How often?
Very often. Every day, every night.
Which women and girls were taken out during the time you were in Partizan?
75, 87, 50, 51, 95, 88, 105.
They would come in and just say, you, and you.
74.
Those that were pointed at had to get up and follow them.
I cried and pleaded with them to let me go. They all laughed.
They kept egging him on and telling him, you have to learn how to rape Muslim women like we are doing.
I just counted up to 10, and I don't know how many there were after that. There could have been about 20 of them. I don't know.
He said, take your clothes off, and I said, I won't. And he slapped me.
They wanted to take my daughter. She was crying, and I said, she's only 12. How can you take my child?
I felt very bad seeing how they would come in helpless, and we shared this sorrow and the tragedy with them.
Did you recognize the soldiers who took them out?
I knew Janko Janic Tuta, Žaga.
Do you know Žaga's full name?
Dragoljub Kunarac. That one there.
Dragoljub Kunarac was well known by everyone around his hometown of Foča as Žaga, the carpenter's son. The file on Žaga lists him as a married man with 3 children and an expert at rigging explosives. He was a commander in the Serb army, the most senior officer of the 3 accused, and the only one to take the stand in his own defense. In his testimony, he argued that the whole thing was a big misunderstanding, and even claimed that one of the prosecution's witnesses had, in fact, made advances at him.
Is it your position accused that DB seduced you?
Not at a single moment did I give any reason. I did not give her a pretext for having sexual intercourse. I didn't say I wanted it. At that moment, I had sexual intercourse with her against my will. I mean, without having a desire for sex.
Mr. Kunarac, let's put things straight.
It was up to prosecutor Hildegard Uritz-Retzlaff to unravel his story.
Taking all these circumstances of her fear, of her not knowing you, of you being the enemy, of being in a house with a pack of soldiers, you knew that she didn't want to have sex with you, did you?
That is precisely why I was as confused as I was.
Let me cite from your previous statement. Somebody said, just pick anyone and take advantage of her.
Well, literally, yes. He said that not only I, but anybody could do whatever he wanted to do, and he can choose any one of them and take advantage of them.
Mr. Kunarac, you understand when someone says, pick anyone and take advantage. You understood that it was an invitation for rape, right?
Yes.
And you know that rape was a crime, even during wartime, isn't it?
Absolutely, I can agree with you there.
No more questions.
In addition to the charges of rape, Kunarac and co-defendant Radomir Kovac, known as Klanfa, were charged with holding some women, including young girls, as their personal property. The prosecutors called it enslavement.
Witness, while you were detained in Klanfa's apartment, were you permitted any contact with the outside world, such as to locate your family and let them know where you were?
No, that was not possible.
Were you able to leave the apartment?
No, we could not get out of the apartment. We were locked in it.
Klamfa told us, we're taking you to us now, you'll be protected. I was just waiting for them to say they would kill us or something like that, because I never believed them for a moment. They were very low-life people. But when the war broke out, and as soon as they managed to get their hands on some rifles, they began to feel big and strong. But they were only brave with us women and children. Yes, they were really brave. And Klamfa was one of these low-life people.
Klanfa was a sub-commander in the Serb military police who moonlighted with the paramilitary force that terrorized Foča during the war. He commandeered the apartment of a displaced Muslim and scrawled his name on the door to stake his claim.
It was cold, and for the most time there wasn't any electricity.
He told me I killed your brother. What can you do about it?
He forced me to take my clothes off, to climb on the table, and to dance to music.
He gave us Serb names, and we didn't dare use our own names.
They always had the weapons with them.
And then he would bring others to rape me.
I was raped from the first moment I came to Kovac's apartment to the last moment.
There were all these things that were meant to humiliate them and make them not human beings. It was the whole picture of making these young girls at the time, 15, 16-year-old girls, into objects and completely stripping them away of their identity.
As a result of all the rapes that you suffered during these many months, did you continue to suffer?
Within me, I still have, and there will always be, traces of everything that happened to me. All my life, I will have thoughts of that and feel the pain that I felt then and still feel. That will never go away.
When he was through with them, Klanfa sold 2 of the girls to a pair of Montenegrin soldiers for $300 each and a truckload of soap. On another day, he sold a 12-year-old girl. She has never been seen again. By the time the trial was over, a total of 63 witnesses from both sides would take the stand, producing more than 6,000 pages of testimony.
All right,
On a late winter's day in 2001, a packed courtroom sat in anticipation.
Today, the trial chamber delivers its judgment in the proceedings against the accused.
There's always a question about what the judges are going to do. So I don't think there was ever a moment where I felt like, yeah, I got him. I think it was more like, I've done the best I can. I really hope you rule in my favor.
Dragolyub Kunaras, you were charged with rape and torture, both as a violation of the laws and customs of war and a crime against humanity.
We got a heads up from the translation unit. They called and said, you're going to be pleased. And that's all she would say. And I was like, tell me more, tell me more. It's like, no, I've said too much, but I pretend I never called you.
There was a landmark ruling by the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague today.
3 former Bosnian Serb commanders have been convicted of raping and torturing Muslim girls and women during the Bosnian War.
Dragolyub Kunarac was sentenced to 28 years.
Radomir Kovac was sentenced to 20 years in prison.
Zoran Vukovic, 12 years.
It's the first time that sexual assault has been treated as a crime against humanity.
And it's the first time it's used the charge of wartime sexual enslavement.
This conviction established sexual enslavement as a crime against humanity.
The trial was distressing for lawyers and witnesses, but may pave the way for justice for other victims.
These women did it. They did it. For me, they are heroes. And so in awe of their fight, of their having done what they did, of facing up to their demons and, you know, just refusing to back down from it. Yeah, it's, for me, it always is still about them.
It was about the truth. It was about all of us knowing what happened at their expense. Let's not forget this. This truth was not said in the privacy of the psychiatrist's office or, you know, a session where they could really know that nobody else will know. It was said in the public forum. We can try to pretend to believe that their identities were protected. Yes, they were protected from somebody who had no idea. But from their communities, everybody knew who testified. It was a pure act of heroism to me. And especially without any guarantee what the result will be in the end.
While the Foča verdicts were celebrated as a legal watershed, for the countless other women raped during the war in Bosnia, there would be no day at The Hague.
The tribunal, it's a symbol, it's an emblematic moment. And no tribunal of this sort can ever prosecute every single crime that happened. At the end of the day, that process has to be owned by the local courts. It has to go back to the national jurisdictions.
In Bosnia, the task of prosecuting war crimes fell to a disparate web of national and local courts spread across a country still fractured along ethnic lines. After surviving the deadly rampage of her neighbor and slipping out of the country, ZR spent years abroad as a refugee. Eventually, she returned to Bosnia, seeking answers and some justice of her own. From her new home, a safe distance away from Foča, she searches for clues about the fate of her husband. So far, in vain. A return to what was left of her in-laws' farm bolstered her claim of rape and murder.
We went to Foča, and we found the remains of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law in the exact place where I said they would be, not a millimeter to the left or right. The prosecutor insisted that I give a statement so that the legal procedure could be initiated and the war criminal could be caught and punished. This was in 2002, and now it's 2010. So for 8 years, no one has managed to arrest him. They claim that it may take time to locate him, but there is no good reason. He's in Foča. He walks around Foča freely, like a normal citizen. And he's not hiding as a war criminal. They are waiting for the victims to die, so the criminals can avoid being punished. That's what they are waiting for in this country of ours.
ZR is just one of 20,000 or more women who have yet to get their day in court. Accurate legal records are hard to come by in Bosnia, but watchdog groups put the number of state prosecutions for all the wartime rapes at a mere 28. With justice delayed, it is left to the survivors themselves to confront the country's denial. Nearly a decade after the war ended, and some 3 years after the guilty verdicts at The Hague, Witness 99 made a return to Foča. She came to the almost all-Serb town with a dozen other wartime rape survivors on a mission of remembrance. They crossed the Drina River that once flowed with Muslim blood, passed the town's monument to Serbs killed during the war, then tried to place a plaque as a tribute to those who suffered at Partizan Hall.
Ne može, jednoglasno su okupljeni Fočaci srpske nacionalnosti dočekali članice udruženja žene žrtve rata u njihovom pokušaju da postave spomen ploču na objekatu u kojem su silovane početkom agresije.
When we saw that so many police officers had come for just the 12 of us, we were shocked. The police formed a line, arm to arm, so that we couldn't break through. When we saw all the people there, we knew that anything could happen. The three-finger salute that the woman is showing is a Serb sign. She's telling us that we should go, that what happened happened, and that we should leave. They kept saying things like they must have had such a great time. They had to come back for more. They claimed that none of this ever took place in Foča or Partizan. The plaque should have been placed there, but they didn't let us. We left the plaque on the grass.
Žene žrtve rata ispraćene su iz Foče pogrdnim riječima, jajima i kamenjem.
I think the plaque should be put up for future generation, so they can learn what was done and what took place. People should know that this happened, and not just in Foča. This should be marked everywhere, so that history can record where these camps were, where women were kept prisoners, and where horrible things happened to them.
I think it takes a long time till the majority of the people accept that their own committed awful things, really awful things. From my own experience in my own country, it takes decades to really bring that into the memory of everybody. I hope in the long term, the judgments of the tribunal will actually lead to the fact that the majority of the population will not deny the events any longer.
We haven't prevented all rapes from happening.
There are rapes happening all the time in conflict. But I think the fact that we did this trial makes people more aware of the issue and aware of the potential consequences. I think it's a very powerful thing to be able to say, if you rape, there is a possibility that you will be prosecuted and sent to jail. And the fact that it was war and that other people were doing it is not a defense.
In terms of development of international law, I'm sure everybody will agree that it has achieved a great deal. But when it comes to providing justice for the victims, they have to answer that question.
I was glad that everyone would answer for what they had done, but it wasn't a very harsh sentence. You know that rape is the worst form of humiliation for any woman, but that was the goal, to kill a woman's dignity. It's clear that all witnesses are part of history, not just me. War criminals wouldn't be known, and there'd be no justice if witnesses didn't testify. I was glad to be able to say what had happened to me, and to say who had done this to me and my people. I felt like I had fulfilled my duty. I'd come to look him in the face. I came to testify.
Visit Women, War and Peace online. Go behind the scenes with narrator Matt Damon. Hear an interview with Gloria Steinem on sexual violence and war. And see how the town of Foča is changing today. It's all at pbs.org. Next time on Women, War and Peace. Once proud Liberia descends into a living hell.
The men brought war, they brought poverty, suffering, everything.
But Liberia's women stared the demons down. Pray the devil back to hell on the next Women, War and Peace. Women, War and Peace is available on DVD for $39.99 plus shipping. To order, call 1-800-336-1917 or write to the address on your screen.